All right, and we're live here for episode 1 of MMA Media Chat, joined today by a very special guest for the first episode. It is, of course, Mike Heck Jr. Thanks so much for joining me, man. How are you?
Lucas, good to see you, man. It's kind of a weird time in the world right now. We're all sort of locked in our houses for the most part, so we're in full quarantine mode. So I think it's nice to give the people something to do, right?
100%. What's your situation like over there? I assume you're in New England? What's the situation like?
It's pretty much like everybody else. Like all the restaurants and bars are closed outside of like takeout and delivery. A lot of the businesses have sort of shut down at this point, and no school, which kind of sucks for me because I
Yeah.
got a 6-year-old that is just running around with nothing to do really. So we try to get out as much as possible. We're not like going to parks where there's like 100 people there or anything like that. But yesterday we were outside running around. We did go to a playground for a little while. There's nobody else there, which is great. So that's pretty much what we're doing. We're trying to get out when we can and trying not to eat 16 pizzas a day. That's pretty much
Right.
where we're at right now.
Yeah, here in France, we're you guys are kind of in the past right now. You'll catch up to us at some point, but here in France, we're in a full quarantine mode. If you want to go out, you have to, fill out a document stating like this is where I live, this is how long I'm gonna be out for. If you go out, it's only for like groceries, exercise, stuff like that. So everything's in complete shutdown over here. So I assume you guys are gonna catch up with us real quick.
Yeah, that's pretty much we're already sort of in that mode right now
Yeah.
within our household. We're just pretty much go to the grocery store, check the mail, get outside for a little while, walks, runs, jogs, stuff like that. But other than that, we're in the house, man. That's pretty much where we're gonna be for the next few weeks at least.
Hey, but what's toilet paper situation like? I'm seeing all the memes online, but is it as bad as it seems?
In my area, not really. Like maybe just because we sort of bought in bulk anyways before all this happened, so we're pretty much in a good place. We're only a household with 3 people in it, so it's not like we have 6, 7, or 8 people. I'm sure that it's a lot worse for them who have like 3 bathrooms and all these
Right.
people that are sharing them. But we don't really have to deal with that. So honestly, I haven't even looked for it, so I don't know how bad it is. But I bet it's probably not as bad as some of the memes and in some of the bigger cities. I'm sure Boston is way worse than we are right now.
Yeah, I was checking with people from North Carolina, and it sounds like people went pretty crazy. I mean, everything's gone. Like, people love buying bread and milk for some reason. I'm not sure what that has to do with, but they're preparing for a snowstorm, and at the same time, a quarantine. So it's a weird situation for them too.
I bet it's crazy.
All right, but let's get into it a little bit. Obviously, the name of the show, it's the MMA Media Chat. So the whole point, we bring on a media member. We talk a little bit about their journey through the industry and things like that. So since you're the first guest, Mike, you get to you get to put the standard, you get to be the standard for everyone that joins on. But let's start here, man. I know whenever you do sort of these kind of podcasts, people are like, how'd you get into MMA and stuff? I want to skip all that. I want to get straight to how did you get into MMA media?
It's kind of interesting. I remember it was like 2012 or 2013. I was driving around in the car and my cousin had called me and said, "Hey, you have to listen to Stone Cold Steve Austin's podcast. Like you have to listen to it. It's really cool. You'll love it." So I started listening to it, and then I listened to like a few episodes, and then I thought to myself, like, I can do something similar. Like I just want to like talk sports and stuff. I was bartending. I was working nights. So during the day and stuff, I had a baby around. My son was just born. And when he was taking naps and stuff, I was just like, man, I don't want to like sit around and watch TV the whole time while he naps. So I got together with a couple of buddies of mine and we just started podcasting. It was like an all sports podcast where we just talked about our home teams and things going on in the world. And we talked about MMA and the UFC once in a while. Like I had a good friend in the Dallas area who was totally engulfed in it and would come on and talk about it. So a while went on, and as the show is progressing, I was like, you know what, I want to start doing interviews. And I thought, Joe Proctor, he was on The Ultimate Fighter. He's from Massachusetts. Like, let me reach out to him and see if he wants to come on and do an interview. So reached out to him on Twitter. He said yes. And then we did an interview. It was like 25 minutes. It went really well. And it was like a week later, and I got a direct message on Twitter from a gentleman named Brian Moore. And he said, "Hey, I have this little group of people. It's called Legends of the Cage. It's all like the sort of the guys who started the sport, started the UFC. It's guys like Mark Coleman. It's guys like and Cal Warsham and guys like that. Emmanuel Yarbrough. So he started like hooking me up with some of these old guys, like old time fighters, some of these legends. And we started having these conversations and they were pretty amazing. And then like a few weeks later, there was this event in Syracuse, New York. And I drove out there. Brian Moore's like, you need to come out and check this out. There's going to be like legends. There's going to be current MMA fighters, come out, check it out and see what you think. So 3 of us went and drove to Syracuse. It's like a 3.5-hour drive. And there was this big weekend fan expo out there. So it was guys like Pat Smith and Kalosha Butterbean was there. And then on top of that, it was Ashley Evans Smith, Carla Esparza, Felice Herrig was there. Brian Ebersole was there. Burt Watson. I mean, it was just a who's who of past, present, and future fighters. And it was really cool. So I went around and was able to get some interviews with all the fighters. And then that's where I met Eric Coal as well. He's the one that brought out Ashley and Carla and Felice. So I got to meet him. And I actually interviewed Eric, which he thought was the most bizarre thing in the world. But I remember when I got out of that, before we were heading back, I was heading back to Western Mass. I was talking to my buddy Ryan Sprague. We went out to Buffalo Wild Wings in Syracuse and we were eating. And I said, you know what, man? I was like, the whole format of this show is going to change. Like, we're doing all MMA. We're going to do all interviews, and that's what we're doing. Like, we're going to talk MMA and just talk to the fighters and hear their stories. And he was a little hesitant at first, but eventually that's the path we chose. And that's really kind of where it all started. That the hustle and the grind began. That's when I realized you got to reach out and grab everything. You got to reach out to all these fighters. You got to send 10, 15 emails a day, 10, 15 Facebook messages and DMs a day to try to book these fighters for interviews. And that's where it all began, man. And it's been kind of a weird ride ever since.
And so were you a full-on MMA fan before you got into all that, or did it kind of come with when you started covering it?
I was sort of like in and out. It just depended on what was going on in my life. So I got into it. Like, I watched a couple of the old ones when I was younger. I just remember sitting at like an aunt and uncle's house and they would order it. And I was just amazed that a little 160-pound guy could defeat a 350-pound guy. I thought that was like the craziest thing ever. And then I think it was, I would watch things sparingly, but it was the first season of The Ultimate Fighter. I know it's like a pretty, cliche story at this point with people my age, but Diego Sanchez, watching him on the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, that's what hooked me. Because of him, I watched every single week. And then, of course, the finale when we saw Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonner, and then Diego Sanchez beat Kenny Florian in the finals to become The Ultimate Fighter. Then, obviously, I think the first pay-per-view I ever ordered was because I was a huge pro wrestling fan, was when Ken Shamrock left the WWE to go back to the UFC and he fought Tito Ortiz. It was UFC 40. It was the first pay-per-view I ever bought. And then I realized, I'm like, Ken Shamrock isn't the most dangerous man in the world because Tito beat the brakes off of him. But it was a great fight. And after the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, I was really into it. And then it was just kind of in waves. Like, there'd be career changes and different things happening in my life. So I would try to catch up. I would read MMA Junkie and MMA Fighting as much as possible to try to at least keep up with everything. But in terms of watching it full on, it didn't really happen again until, 2012, 2013.
And so you mentioned doing your first interview and stuff, and from what it sounds like from you, it's like you just kind of went in there, did the interview. I remember my first ever interview. I was a wreck. I was so nervous. I was sweating and everything. I was like, you got to do this, shaking. Did you feel anything like that, or was it just like, we got to go out there and do this? I mean, what was it like for that first interview?
Proctor was interesting because he was a Boston guy. So I grew up in the Boston area. So we hit it off right away. So it was, I knew things about him. I did my research ahead of time, and we just shot the breeze, man. It was just like a casual conversation. That actually wasn't even my first MMA interview, now that I think about it, because right before, it was probably like a month after I started the podcast, I got a phone call about asking me if I wanted to be on the radio. Like, what are your thoughts of being on the radio? And before that, like, I was bartending, but I was also DJing weddings. I was hosting trivia shows and karaoke shows and things like that. And of course, like, when you get a phone call like that, like, how would you like to be on the radio? I was like, sure, I would love to be on the radio. So I fell into that. And then like 3 weeks after I started working at the radio station, one of the guys that I work with, our brand manager, goes, hey, I just got a phone call from one of our clients. They want to know if we want to interview this guy named Damian Maya, like, because he's in town for a seminar. He goes, I don't think I'm going to do it. I'm like, you get his ass into the studio because I want to interview Damian Maya. So this is before, like, I was comes into the studio with, because they're an affiliate of his. He came out to do a seminar. I got to talk to Damian Maya on like just a cool level. We're just talking. I approached that interview like I'm guessing most people that are listening right now have no idea what the UFC is, or they have their own vision of the UFC. Like it's human cockfighting and it's just like a bunch of barbarians getting in there beating the crap out of each other. But I wanted to tap into Damian's side, how he doesn't want to hurt people, and that it's a really athletic thing. And, it's not just fighting, it's martial arts. And Damian did a great job explaining it. We kept it really simple in those terms. And then the Proctor interview was just a whole different thing. It was more like a journey throughout his career. How did he get to the Ultimate Fighter? What was growing up in Boston like? Things like that. So, from there, like I always have this shoot the breeze approach. Like there's things that I want to touch on, but at the end of the day, like I always let the guest and the fighter dictate where it's going to go. Like whatever they want to talk about, you could see it in their eyes, you could hear it in their voice, what direction they want to go. If they want to talk about something, they want to talk about it. If they don't want to talk about it, that as well. So I kind of just am a feel it as we go kind of an interviewer.
And when you first started it, what was kind of the goal, like long term? Like, where did you see yourself taking this sort of MMA media, I guess you can say, career or journey?
That's a great question. When I started, I was like, I don't know. Like, I think I just had like a sports radio bug at some point. And then especially once I got into radio, the station I worked for, it was like a hot AC top 40. It's like basically like today's hits. And then as the music continued to go out and it's just like everything sounds exactly the same, you just want to have another outlet to talk more. Because it's not like you could talk for 20 minutes doing an afternoon radio show. It's like boom, 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 music. Here's 60 seconds at the most, and then you're on to the next thing. At least this provided an outlet where I could still tap into that, but do things a little bit differently, talk a little more, tell stories a little bit more, since I didn't really have that outlet before. But in terms of where I thought I was going to go covering the sport, I didn't really have any expectations. Like there were dreams and goals that I had. Like I always had a mentality that you never know who's going to be listening or watching anything that you do. Like that's how I always approach things, even on the radio. Like, maybe some high level exec is just somehow driving through the Berkshires and they heard my voice and they want to offer me, a job, replacing Howard Stern or something. Like I always took that approach. So I didn't really have any expectations early on. I think as things started to happen, I started meeting different people and talking to different people. And then I realized that, interviews are great, podcasts are great, but you got to be able to do everything. You got to be able to write. You got to be able to do videos. You got to be able to think outside of the box. You have to be good at everything. Like you have to find a way, maybe not even good at everything, but you have to know something about everything in this business. And that's something that I continue to learn pretty much every day, every week, covering the sport. And that's one of the things I always tell people all the time. Like you just got to try things. You got to try things and learn everything you possibly can. Like if you want to make it in the sport, you have to learn how to write. You have to. That's so important. Like you could be the best interviewer in the world, but if even Ariel Helwani is Ariel Helwani. I mean, he is the face of MMA media and has been for a long time and will be, but he still writes. He still writes a column every week. If he breaks news, he always writes it. Like it's so important to not just do one thing. You have to be able to adverse yourself into multiple things.
Right. With that in mind, at what point did you make that switch into an outlet? Because we know we have these MMA specific outlets and you kind of have this ladder that you have to climb when you start getting into the industry. What was kind of the first outlet you joined and what was that experience like?
My MMA News was the first one that reached out to me because, like I said, I met Eric in Syracuse. We friended each other on Facebook, and then I started putting the podcast out with the interviews. And I think it was I did an interview with Burt Watson like 2 weeks after that event, and Eric reached out to me. He goes, "Dude, that interview is awesome. Like, do you want us to host the podcast for you?" And I was like, "All right." So for a while, I would just do the podcast. I would send him the links, and he would put up the post. And we did that for like a year. And then I remember I covered UFC, like when UFC or MMA became legal in New York. I covered the first event in Albany. Derek Lewis versus Shamil Abdurrahimov was the main event.
Impressive last name.
I know, right? I got credentialed through the radio station, but I was still doing stuff for Eric at the same time. 2 months later, UFC headed to Brooklyn for UFC 208. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to apply for credentials and just like see if I get them. Like if I get them, great. If I don't, I don't. And I ended up getting them. So drove out to Brooklyn on my own dime, stayed at a hotel, had no idea what I was doing. Like Albany's easy because it's a 45-minute drive. So I could just sleep at home, drive out to media day, open workouts, drive home, do the same thing for all this stuff. Brooklyn's a whole different ball game because you're away. You're away. So I didn't do my research. I stayed at a hotel that was like 20 minutes away from where everything was happening. So I spent more money on parking than anything else because I had to drive to each place. Everything was like $16 an hour to park. It was absolutely ridiculous, but it was open workouts at UFC Brooklyn or UFC 208. And I met Mike Dice for the first time from Fansided, and we were shooting the breeze. He was like, "Oh yeah," he goes, "Do you ever think about writing?" And I was like, honestly, I never really have. I'd written like a couple things for Eric, but I hadn't really gotten into actually writing for MMA. And Mike's like, goes, "Dude," he goes, "Just give it a shot and see what you think. Like, I'll help you. Like, I'll guide you." He goes, "We do pay. It's not a lot, but like, it's something to get you moving into a different direction." So I was like, all right. And Mike was amazing, man. Like joining that team at Fansided at that time was incredible. Mike was there. Jose Youngs was there. James Lynch had come on not too long after that. Like we had we were building a dream team over there. And I remember starting to write and like I would submit these things and Mike would reach out to me, direct message and be like, "Hey, I like where you went with this, but here's what I would do differently. Like, here's how you should have approached this. Here's how you do that." And he was always great with like constructive criticism, like things I need to do better. And then I started getting the bug. Then I started getting the writing bug. Like once I started getting into it and learning how it worked, it just got better. And then Mike left and Jose stuck on, and same thing. He was giving me great advice. We were doing different things. We covered UFC 220 in Boston together, which was really cool. And we were doing all these different things. So that meeting with Mike Dice, and just, even though I wasn't comfortable with writing, just me saying yes to him and, letting him guide me in a way, jumping on that opportunity, that was one of the best decisions I've made in this career, in my career so far.
So you touched on it a little bit, but who were like your biggest mentors in this industry? And even today at this point, if you still feel like you do have a mentor at this point?
Eric is, I owe a lot to Eric Kowal because he's the first one that I met. He's the first one that actually had any faith in me, in my opinion. Like he reached out to me, he gave me good compliments. Like if he thought something sucked, he would just, Eric, he would just come on and be like, "Dude, that sucked. That was terrible." So he was great. Mike Dice was a great mentor at the time because, while he was covering, he's on to bigger and better things now, working for NBC Chicago. Damon Martin was always great. I always enjoyed talking to him. Whenever I was like in a rut, I would have Damon come on my podcast and we would just talk about either the pay-per-view that just happened or the event that just happened or just something going on in the sport. And like his excitement and his energy just really fired me up. But I got to say, like, at least currently, and all those guys are very important as well. Jose's been great, but James Lynch to me has always been sort of my guy. Like him and I have been talking and following each other for years at this point. Whenever either of us has something we want to get off our chest, we go to each other and talk about it. There was a time where I was going to be done with covering MMA. I got a promotion at my job and it was going to take a lot of my time. And for me, like if I'm going to do something, I want to do it. I want to give it like as much as I possibly can. And if I could only do like one interview a week or like one interview every 2 weeks, like I didn't feel like I wanted to do that because I wanted to be as consistent as possible. But I remember telling James, I'm like, "Dude, I think I'm done. I think I'm done doing it." And he was just like, "No, don't be done. Like do whatever you can. Like keep going. Just even if you have to do one interview a week, like just do it." And I'll never forget that conversation. And even to this day, like him and I are still like that. And I finally got to meet him in person in October at UFC Boston. He actually stayed at my parents' house the first night in Boston because I drove to Boston. He wanted to be out there for open workouts the next day. And where the company he was working for wouldn't cover the flight that day, like they wouldn't cover a hotel that day. So I was like, "Dude, you could stay at my parents' house. Like my mom's in Florida right now. My dad said it's cool. So come." And I just remember heard the doorbell ring and I opened the door. I'm like, "Man, Lynch is way taller than I thought he was going to be." And then we just went out and had a good time. And then we covered UFC 244 in New York together. But Lynch is just when people say Lynch is the best guy in the industry, that's not a joke. That's not like a thing just people say. Like he is legit like the nicest guy you will ever meet. And if you ever need anything, he's the guy to reach out to. He's just the man. And he makes me better too.
100%. I mean, while we're giving praise to James Lynch, I mean, he's always been there for me. And, when I started doing the video interviews, he was actually the first person I reached out to because I was like, look, man, I have a lot of respect for what you do and everything. And I'm getting into this video stuff, but I want to make sure it's cool with you before I do that. I don't want to come in here and step on any toes. And obviously, you know how James Lynch is. I mean, he's great. He makes these videos letting you know how to do stuff. I mean, he really is one of the best people in the industry for sure. And we had him on the last episode of the podcast. But it's funny to hear you talk about almost quitting because I think I saw it on Twitter or something like that. Are you full-time in MMA?
Yes. So that's another whole crazy story.
Right.
Yeah. So it was the end of 2018 and my wife and I were ready to make a switch. Like I moved to the Berkshires in like 2010. She moved like not too far after we met, we got married, it's the same old story, but we were kind of like, I want to do something else. So we had talked about moving to Cape Cod and made this decision to see what's out there. So I had actually got offered a job promotion at the cluster of radio stations I was at. I turned it down and got into a marketing job for another cluster of radio stations on Cape Cod. So the problem with that was I had to go by myself, let my son finish school, and then after 6 or 7 months, the plan was they were going to move down as well, bank some money and buy a place and go. And I went and it was good for a while. Like, I got to do more in MMA because I would go to work and I would come home and I would just bang out interviews and I would host between the links and do stuff like that because I had all this extra time because my family was 3 hours away. But it just began to wear on me because one, I couldn't see my son and my wife every single day. I mean, thank God for FaceTime and stuff, but two, I would drive home every Friday in the middle of rush hour traffic to get home and see them. So I would leave work at 5 o'clock on Friday. I'd get in my car. I would drive 3 hours, 3.5 with the traffic. And I would see my family. Like that night, I'd hang out with my kid for like 20 minutes before he went to bed. We'd have Saturday and then like a few hours on Sunday. And then I had to drive back to the Cape to get ready to work the next day. So I was seeing them like one full day a week. And it was starting to like really wear me down. And we got to the point where we were kind of putting numbers together. And my wife's like, I don't think we're going to be able to move down there because everything's so expensive for like maybe another year. And I'm like, Holly, I love you. I know we want to do this, but I'm not doing this shit for another year. I'm not.
Right.
So she made the decision. She's like, maybe reach out to the radio station and see what's going on. And then my other idea was, I was like, listen, I was like, if we're going to do this MMA thing full time, like I have to do it now. Like I have to do it. Just let me do it. Let me just reach out to sites and see if anybody will take me on. And we'll just do it that way. Like the money's not going to be great, but at least like give me a chance to do this. Like I wanted to do this 3 years ago. I got this other job opportunity that I couldn't turn down. I was like, but if we're going to do something while we're in this transitional phase, like now's the time to do it. I'm like, I just want 1 year to try it. Give me a year and we'll see where it goes. And if it goes well, we'll keep going. If not, I promise you I will find something else. And that's how it all started. Reached out to Hunter Homistek when he was at Flow Combat. Jumped on with them. Eric, I've always been doing stuff with him. And then I got on with the Body Lock and eventually with the Scrap and bjpenn.com and started doing more stuff for the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network. So I felt like doing that, I got the best of all worlds. Like I got to host Between the Links and, really be myself and just be a host and a broadcaster. With the interviews, talk to the fighters. Love doing that. With like the Body Lock, I got to write like full length features, which was like something I'd never really done before. Like I'd written like articles and interviews up, but like to go in there and do like investigative journalism and have the opportunity to write like full on like 2,500 word, huge long form articles. Like the Body Lock was great with that. And what a great team they have over there. But I felt like I had the best of all worlds. And I feel like if anyone really wants to make it in this sport and really wants to like see if they have what it takes, I think you got to take a year. I think you got to save your money and then take a year and just do it. Like just dive into it, see what it's like see what the grind feels like, feel that hit on your paycheck, like feel what that's like and not putting as much money as you're used to in your bank account, but at least building that experience, which can be more valuable at the same time. So, God bless my wife for giving me the support and, luckily she makes pretty good money. So she was able to support us a little bit more, but I always did stuff on the side too. I still DJ and still do stuff whenever I can. So at least I can supplement some income in that way, but it ain't easy. I'll say that.
And so when you go full time, I think a lot of people don't realize, but you have to start making content for all these different websites that have these big expectations. I know when I joined SureDog, they were like, we want 15 interviews a month, which, I was only doing about half of that. And I was like, shit, 15 is a lot. So I imagine someone like you who's got to make all this content. How do you make that? How do you make that happen? Making sure you got enough for every website.
That's probably the trickiest part of everything. I mean, for me, like, it got to the point where I was like, I'm just going to reach out to everybody and then I'll just spread them out how I can. Like, it was weird. I can't find it right now, but I actually had a notebook where I would like rank each fighter, like give them a point total. Like I'd give them a point total, be like, all right, they did this. He's a regional guy, but he's a champion. So he gets more points. And then like, I would make sure I spread the points out evenly across the websites. Right. It was so ridiculous. But then I got to the point where I was like, all right, for this site, I'm going to focus more on, some of the regional guys. Like this site, I'll focus more on like UFC guys. Like this site, I'm going to focus more on like, people who I think deserve more shine, but they're not getting it. And eventually I was able to spread things out in that way. And then I had to kind of put together and prioritize my time, what it was worth, what I need to put more energy towards. Like stuff for the Body Lock. Like I love working for the Body Lock. They're a great team over there, but working for the Body Lock takes there's a lot of extra things you have to do. Like you have to do the interview, you got to put it on YouTube, but then you have to write it up at the same time. And they want like long form articles, which once in a while I get that itch and I want to scratch it. But a lot of other times it's just, you look at your schedule, like, holy crap, I have like 18 more interviews I got to do this week. I don't know if I'm gonna have time to write these up. So it just gets to a point where you just have to prioritize where things need to go. And that takes time too. You learn something different every month. Like sometimes what your priorities were in August change in September and so forth and so on. And everyone's priorities are changing right now with
right.
COVID-19 and everything happening right now. And there's no fighting to watch. So just, it's a very interesting time. And I'm glad that I've been doing the full-time stuff for a while so I could learn those things and try to find more unique creative content to do.
I'm curious, when you reach out to new guys, I mean, obviously when you talk to people you have before, you don't have to introduce yourself, hopefully again, but when you introduce yourself, do you include the outlet that you're with, or is it just about trying to get that interview and then you figure out who you're going to give it to?
It depends. Like for the most part, it's like on Mike Heck, I do stuff for like multiple different websites. Like I try to lead in like that. And if like I get a response from a fighter or manager and they say, what outlet is it for? I'll tell them. Like I'll figure it out and tell them. But for the most part, I just say like, I freelance for a number of different websites. Sometimes I'll list them all. And then I realized that was such a waste of time. So I was just, I write for a month. And then you just hope like someone just takes the time to just like look you up and they see like, oh, he interviewed this person and this person. Okay, cool. Like I'll do it. I think eventually like I've been doing this for so long. I've done so many interviews at this point that I feel like I've either interviewed a teammate of theirs or their manager at least knows who I am at least. So I feel like it's a lot easier than it was 5 years. Like 5 years ago, they're like, who are you? Yeah. Or I get no response. And I feel like it's a little bit easier now that I've put in so much time. But it still is, but mostly it's just, Mike Heck, I do this for this. And then at this point in my career, it's just like, if they want to do an interview, they'll just do it. If they don't, I'll move on to the next one. Like I'm not going to chase anybody down at this point. Like there's so many people with stories to tell. I'll just move on to the next one.
And as you're making this content, I know me, for example, if I have an interview that blows up, gets 1,000 views, half the comments are, who the fuck is that guy interviewing him and how did he get those interviews? At what point did you feel like people started to recognize you and then they know it's like, oh, Mike Heck, you can count on him for this interview and stuff like that? At one point, did you feel like people started recognizing you and that you might start building a fan base?
I would say like, I'm trying to put this, I would say I'm like the Brandon Moreno of MMA media. Like, I think people I think people like watching me, but nobody really knows who I am. Like, I think we're getting to a point where, I feel like we're getting to a point where we're building to that. Like Brandon Moreno's probably a win away, if not ready to fight for a belt right now. I feel like I'm on the cusp there as well in terms of like people knowing who I am. At first, it was just like nobody watched, nobody cared. And I was like, I don't care. I'm just going to put in the reps and make it happen. Like I had some big podcast interviews and some things that have happened. So like my name got out there a few times, but it's at this point, I feel like we're in a nice like level thing. Like my interviews don't get a ton of views, and I don't really care, but I feel like I know for a fact that, Brennan Fitzgerald, and I know that guys like, that work for the UFC for Contender Series. Like I know those guys are watching my interviews because they've told me that they have. I know that there are certain commentators out there who watch my interviews for fighters who are making their debuts. Like it's just, those are the things I do them for. And if they get 10,000 views, great. If they get, 15 views, whatever. I don't really care. I just know that with every interview I do, I'm getting better. I did an interview after Alex Hernandez lost to Donald Cerrone. I had the first and only interview with Hernandez for months. I'm still getting crushed on that on that interview all these months later. And the problem was it wasn't a video interview. I had a certain time frame to interview him. And it unfortunately was while I was driving home to see my family. So by the time Alex reached out to me and said, I'm ready to go, I had to pull over at a Burger King in Foxborough, Massachusetts. No video. I just had to download Skype on my phone, and I sat at a Burger King booth, put the Wi-Fi on, and I interviewed Alex Hernandez in the middle of a Burger King. But I think that interview has 15,000 views now. It just keeps going up, but it's all this big. They're not great positive comments. They're wow, great interview. They're Alex Hernandez is a piece of shit. I can't believe you talked all the crap to Donald Cerrone. You're a terrible human being. And it's just crazy to see how some of these interviews, the paths they take and stuff. And there's some interviews that I'm just man, how has this interview not gotten any love right now? Because I thought it was really good, and the fighter delivers in a big way. And then you just get to the point where I don't care. As long as I'm happy with it, and I feel the fighter delivered and the fighter is happy with it, that's all that matters to me at the end of the day, not the views and the comments and the likes and things like that.
And so, as you're chugging along in your career, we saw James Lynch was in a very similar position to yourself. And, his goal was always to go full time with one outlet. What's your goal at this point? I mean, is it to just keep chugging along with what you're doing, or do you have that goal eventually being full time with one outlet?
I would like to be full-time at one outlet. It's just easier. You know what I mean? Not easier, but I feel if I could do what I'm doing now for one outlet, that would be amazing. Rather than spreading it out with 6 or 7 outlets, that's what I want. I'm sorry if you hear some banging and clanging. We get some construction going on in the basement right now. But that's what I want to do. Wherever this thing takes me, I'm at a point where I can make some moves and add to the freelance funnel at this point, which may happen, may not happen. I don't know. But I mean, eventually I'd like to land in one spot. And I think my goal with MMA media right now is not to it's not specifically I want to be on ESPN and be on the UFC broadcast. If it happens, that, I mean, who wouldn't want that? But I just want I want the chance to show the world what I can do. That's honestly, that's my goal. I want to have the opportunity to hit a bunch of people at once and be oh man, where the hell has this guy been? That's what I want. That's the goal. I want just an opportunity to show what I can do. And if what I can do is not what the people want, it is what it is. But I just want that opportunity. That's my major goal with the sport.
And I know, a lot of people that are up and coming in the industry, they ask for advice, things like that. And they usually want to know, what are some of those mistakes you made when starting out and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I have a whole host of them, a whole list of them. But I want to start with you before I get into mine. What are some mistakes you made, or looking back, you're God damn it, Mike, if we could have just avoided that, things could be different?
I don't feel in terms of my work, I don't think I've made a ton of mistakes. There are interviews that I've wrapped up and damn it, I wish I asked him that question, or I wish I did this better. At first, I think the one thing that I did wrong early on was I listened to everything that I did. I realized that I'm so self-critical in that way. I'm just man. And then I end up getting mad. When I listen to it, I'm I should have done this. I should have done this. I should have done this. So I kind of there are certain things that I will go back and watch. If I have a really good interview, I'll go back and watch it again. If there's a moment on between the links that I remember just cracked me up, I'll go back and listen to that episode. But very rarely do I go back and listen to everything. So I think that's a good piece of advice. The one mistake that I totally regret in MMA was, and here's great advice for you up and comers right now: don't tag the opposing fighter in anything. Okay.
Right.
So I did an interview right after UFC 208 with Bilal Muhammad. And Bilal Muhammad didn't get to talk to Joe Rogan after the fight because he was going to call out Mickey Gall. He was going to call out Mickey Gall. And Mickey and I have had a great relationship over the years. When Mickey was on looking for a fight and he called out CM Punk, like I was the first person he interviewed with, and we built a great relationship. So after that interview gets released, I'm like, Bully B 170 calls out at Mickey Gall for a fight. And then even on Facebook, I did the same thing. And I didn't think there was anything wrong with that. Like I was new and green. I didn't know what the hell was going on. But then I realized like anytime I would text Mickey Gall for an interview, he would always be like, yep, let's do it. Then I would text him. Nothing. 2 months later, nothing. 3 months later, nothing. Oh, he's going to fight Sage Northcutt. Nothing. And I'm like, what the hell, man? So finally, like it was all this time later, he ended up on Ariel's show. And he talked like Ariel apparently did something too that pissed him off. So he let Ariel have it on the show. And then like 3 weeks later, this is probably like a year and a half after it happened. Mickey texts me, he goes, "Can I call you?" I said, "Okay." Calls me up and just reams me out on the phone. He goes, "I can't believe you did that. You tagged me and all this. Like I thought we were cool. Like, and now you're tagging me to put this guy over. Like, I can't believe you did that shit. Like, it really put a bad taste in my mouth." And I'm like, dude, I was like, honestly, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just like, oh, this is cool. Like, this guy calls out this guy. I was like, in a weird way, I thought I was making a fight. Like, this is going to be cool. Like, give Mickey an opportunity, like give Bilal an opportunity. That's how I thought. I wasn't just like, ooh, hopefully everybody retweets this thing. So we talked and we hashed it out, and I never made that mistake again. So that's a good piece of advice. Do not tag the opposing fighter. Like if you interview fighter A and he calls out fighter B, tag fighter A, mention fighter B's name, but don't tag him in it because you'll get some shit and you'll lose some respect.
All right. Well, here's a huge mistake I made, which I think is helpful for people because I think when you first start out, a lot of people make this mistake. I was way too eager when I started. I was already thinking about like, I'm going to be with one outlet and be full time, be covering these events. And after writing about 3 articles, my dumbass was already pitching my services to, websites like Flow Combat, Bloody Elbow. When at the time, when you're only doing like, you've only written 3 articles, you're a glorified fan, especially when they're all just opinions. It's like, yeah, any idiot can do that pretty much. So, it got to a point where you're sending emails and you're trying to pitch your services. Like, listen, I'm up and coming. I was 19 at the time, but it's like, I'm up and coming. You guys should take a chance on me. And looking back at it now, it's like, if the biggest thing you can do is find a website, a good website. You mentioned my MMA News, a good website like that where you have people that are honest with you and you can just hunker down and just keep working and be consistent. And, I think to this day, Bloody Elbow, if they ever see my name everywhere, they start shivering. They think, oh God, it's going to start harassing us again. I mean, I don't know how many times we have to tell him, nicely, like, hey, man, just keep working, keep grinding. You'll get there someday. And Flow Combat, I eventually weaseled my way in there, but, I feel like I wasn't ready at the time. So the biggest thing I would say is find yourself a good, consistent website, a really good editor. I mean, you mentioned the people that were behind you, and just find those guys that are going to help you hunker down. Just keep building that portfolio, keep working, keep grinding and all that stuff. Because if you're too overeager, that those can be mistakes that can, affect you in the future. Because look, today, I'm sure if I emailed Bloody Elbow, they'd be like, fuck's sake, he's, we're years later and he's still doing this shit again. Like, look, man, if you're good, we might come see you. So that was definitely it for me.
And with that, if you can get on with an outlet that has credentials, I would recommend, even it's going to cost you money. Like you have to invest in yourself if you really want to do this. Go cover as many events as you can. Like even if it's on a local, regional sense, like at least get in there and like be around people who cover other people who cover the sport. Cause you never know, like you could go to a local regional event and you see like Junkie there or MMA Fighting there, or, some other outlets that, be like, oh yeah, you know what? We had a guy who did interviews. He's gone now. Like maybe you can fill that spot. Like it's nice to get out there and at least network, like get out there and network, get your name out there. So at the end of the day, like you leave a good impression on them when you're covering an event. They see you cover it professionally. You're doing the right things. You're grinding away. You're not taking pictures with fighters and doing stupid things like that. Like they see that, then they're like, all right, when your name comes up, they're like, oh yeah, I covered an event with him. Like he did a good job. He was very professional. The kid was busting his ass. Like he didn't sleep it all the whole week. Like that's the stuff they remember. So if you can get on with an outlet that, can cover an event, and even if you don't even work for them now, like take an opportunity. Like there's sites out there that, have credentials that can't send anybody out there. Could be, like an Irish site or a European site or something like that. And maybe they want the coverage, but they can't send anybody out there. You send them an email, you jump up to the opportunity. Can I use your outlet for credentials? Sure. We're not going to pay anything, but you can use them. At least you get out there and you're networking and you get to see what a UFC fight week is like. Cause a lot of people are like, this is great. Like you get to sit cage side and watch a fight. Like that's the coolest thing ever. And then you tell them what actually happens. Like, dude, you are up and running for 5 days straight. It does not stop. And then even when the fight's over, you're still working till 4, 5, 6 in the morning. And then you have to drive home or fly home. It doesn't stop. And you probably aren't going to sleep till Monday. Like they don't know that stuff.
For sure. Last on the MMA debate show, I had James Lynch. So I was like, one of the topics we have to talk about is, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see other media members that interview fighters do? And we spent a good 20 minutes on there just like going over all the stuff we saw. But now that I have you on, Mike, the question goes to you. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see from people doing interviews? And even if it's something I do, I mean, you're on my show, but, come at me like if you have a specific example, you know what I mean? Like, what are those things you see where that make you cringe? You're like, God damn it, man.
I think everyone has their own unique style. So for me to sit there and be like, and rip apart how you do things, I don't think is fair, because what I do may not work for you. What you do may not work for me, and so forth and so on. Like, I do think there are media members out there, people who are just getting in the interview game, that ask super long-winded questions, that are like 2 minutes long. Like, do I feel like sometimes I talk a lot? Sure. But I feel like there's a purpose to it. Like, I try to talk to fighters like we're sitting at a bar and having a conversation for the most part. Yeah. Like, if I was sitting with them, like having a beer and having a burger with them, like these are the questions I would ask them, like in the same exact way. If you're using that time to ask a question just to show how much you know about fighting, that's different. I feel like that's an issue. But my one piece of advice that I would give in terms of anybody getting into this sport, even if you've been in it for 6 months, a year, 2 years, is you need to interview everybody. Like, do not say no. If some management team reaches out to you and says, I have an amateur fighter who's 5-0 right now, who's fighting for an amateur welterweight title in, Hidalgo, Texas next week, you say yes to that interview. Why? For multiple reasons. One, you're getting better. You get your reps in. And if you can do it, like anyone can do an interview with Stipe Miocic right now. We know who he is. He's the world champion. He's the baddest man on the planet. DC's right there. Like, if Stipe jumped on right now, we could both interview him, no problem. But the challenge of interviewing an amateur fighter that nobody knows outside of his hometown and like making it cool, like that's a challenge. And that's really awesome when you can do that. And you never know like where these fighters can go. Like, I can't even tell, like Lynch has a laundry list of guys he interviewed at 1-0, 2-0 who are in the UFC right now, or, fighting for titles and things like that. Like, and I've done the same. Like, I've interviewed guys before their pro debut who have either been in the UFC or in the UFC right now. That's a relationship you need to have down the road. Like Shorty Torres. I interviewed Shorty Torres before his pro debut, and we've been doing interviews forever. Like, when he got signed to the UFC, I knew right away. Jared Brooks, like all these guys, like, it's so important to interview these guys on the come up, because no one's giving them the shine. They're going to remember the guy who gave it to them. So highly recommend interview everybody. Like, there's certain cases where you're just like, I'm not going to like do it. But for the most part, if a manager reaches out to you and drops a name, do not say no because they're not in the UFC or they're not in Bellator or anything like that. Like, take the opportunity to get to know them, because once in a while you're going to catch lightning in a bottle. And there are certain regional fighters out there that deliver better interviews than anybody on the UFC roster right now. I can guarantee you. So that would be my piece of advice. Like, I've had managers tell me like, oh, I reached out to this guy, but he said no because he's not a big enough name. I'm like, are you shitting me right now? Like, who is this person? Like, is this Ariel or something? No, it's just, it's a media member B. He said, no, he's not a big enough name, so I don't want him. I'm like, that is dumb. That is not smart at all. So that's my biggest advice. I think that's the biggest hole in the sport right now, is that we're not getting enough regional fighters and regional interviews. Like, these are guys that could be on the Contender Series this summer. Like, all these guys could be on the Contender Series in 2 years, and they're going to remember, like, even before their Contender Series fight, you're going to reach out to them and be like, oh yeah, man, you interviewed me 6 months ago or 2 years ago before my third amateur lightweight title fight. And now I'm getting ready to fight on the Contender Series. Like, of course I'll do an interview with you. Of course I'll do this. Of course I'll do that. Like, that's what you got to do. You got to build that pipeline in that way. And I think maybe like 2 or 3 times in my career, I've actually said no to an interview unless it was like a scheduling conflict. And there were reasons why I said no, because of reputational stuff that I had found out and things I had learned about these people. But other than that, I've interviewed everybody. I still interviewed an amateur fighter 3 months ago. Like 3 months ago, still interviewed an amateur fighter. I've been doing this 5 years, and it was a great interview that got a ton of views. So don't say no to anybody for the most part. I mean, do your research, but if someone offers you an opportunity to interview anybody, you interview them.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with a lot of that. The point about the long questions, that was the point I brought up with James Lynch. It was like, man, you have to remember that people, chances are they didn't click because you're on the video. They're really clicking for the fighters. And if you spent 2 minutes, and it's like, it's one thing to set up your questions because you don't want to do a rapid fire, just point blank. What do you think about your fight? This or that. You want to set it up. But if it's 2 minutes of give us background on first half of the question, give us background on the second thing of the question, fun fact thrown into the question. And then you have to remember, man, some of these fighters, they don't even remember like the beginning of the question actually. So, that's definitely a good point that you bring up. In terms of everyone, here's an example of something. I talked to Muhammad Usman when he signed for PFL. As you know, PFL was like offering up interviews. And I was like, yeah, for sure. I definitely want to talk to Mo, wherever you stand with, whether you think he's a prospect or not, now that he's with the PFL. But his views did a lot better than maybe some of the UFC guys like Sean O'Malley, for example, Gilbert Burns, things like that. It did really well. So you never know who's the sort of the diamond in the rough in terms of views and things like that. So it's a good point, building these relationships, and the people, I mean, the fighters, they remember as well. I mean, they'll mention something. So, they find that important too.
The biggest episode of the SFLC podcast we ever had was a show. It was Shorty Torres and Matt Bissett. Neither of them were in the UFC. Neither of them. It was I think it was like the 28th ranked sports podcast in all of sports on iTunes that week. Neither of them are in the UFC because those guys shared the crap out of that. And they have a lot of fans that support them. That was by far. And I've had some big interviews on that show. I had Amanda Nunes, who was about to fight Ronda Rousey on that show, like on the SFLC podcast. It didn't do even close to what that episode did. So that's why I always tell people, like, doesn't matter. Just interview them, get it out, get better, and things will happen. Like, fighters appreciate that. So they truly, truly appreciate that stuff. We are in a position where we are covering a sport where the access to the fighters is better than any other sport on the planet. Like, 100%. Take advantage of that. Like, interview everybody. Like, law of averages. Boom, 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 boom. Keep going.
For sure. And so when you go out to do these interviews, I mean, do you just reach out to, like, do you have like sort of a list of who has a fight coming up and you're going to reach out to them, who's coming off fights? What's your process for, I've got guys that I need to talk to, people I need to interview?
I'll take a look at like upcoming cards and like, I'll reach out in that sense. Luckily for me, because I've done so many interviews over the years and I built like really good relationships, a lot of times, like, managers reach out to me and be like, I got this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy's fighting this one's fighting an LFA. This one just got signed to the UFC. So like, it makes life a little bit easier in that sense, but you also want to be able to still have that grind too. You don't want to just like interview the same, like, you just don't want to interview like the same fighters from the same management company, like every single time. Like, I feel like you have to go out there and get different people too. So I think it's like a good mix for me. Like, I have the opportunity to interview certain fighters on a weekly basis, but at the same time, like, if I'll still reach out and try to get as many people as I can. So it's like a good balancing act, I think, to spread the wealth.
So right now, we did mention it off the top. We're going through these coronavirus times. People are having to work from home. People are wondering, what are media members going to do for content? And I'm laughing as I hear guys going, oh, we're going to figure out this Skype stuff and try to figure out the quality. It's like, come on, man, you got to step up. But for you guys at this point, what's the plan going forward with the content? Are you going to keep trying to push out these interviews? I mean, what have you thought about what the plan is for you as you go into these unsure weeks?
I'm pretty much going to do what I do. Like, I feel like even at this point, like, I did 5 interviews over the last 2 days. Like, people want to talk. People are coming off wins. Gilbert Burns won. Brandon Moreno won. Eric Anders had a fight canceled. Talk to him. Kevin Holland had a fight canceled. Talk to him. There's still events that are scheduled to happen at this point. Like, talked to Kama Worthy yesterday. Like, that UFC 249 is still happening, at least for now. It may change in a couple of weeks, but it might still happen. Dana White seems like it's gonna happen no matter where it is around the world. There's lots of fights still scheduled, so it's not like there's no interviews to be had, and even fighters who have lost their opportunities to fight, like, they want to talk about it too. Like, and I feel like with them being quarantined, what the hell else are they gonna do? Like,
Right.
let's get them. Like, this is an opportunity for media members. Like, if there's a fighter out there that you never thought you'd have the chance to interview, like, you might be able to interview them now. There's a very real chance that they're just like, sure, like, he's bored in his house right now. Of course he would do an interview with you. Like, thank God someone reached out. Like, you could be in that position right now. But at the same time, like, you want to do some different things too. So I've been thinking of different ways to do some different kinds of contents, like, outside of the interview stuff. Like, and even if I do an interview, just take it in a different direction. I haven't really landed on like what I think's the bread and butter at this point, but I am thinking about it. But other than that, nothing's really going to change too much for me.
And so we saw you with a Loudmouth for a long time. I think you announced not too long ago that was coming to an end. But I do want to talk about, you guys took the format from ESPN, Around the Horn, which is this great concept because nobody had thought of that. But how did that idea come together? Whose idea was it? How did you guys make that happen?
So Davidson Baker used to host Around the Cage on the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network, and I had been on there a couple of times. But it's a lot of work to do that show. Like, Davidson, the way it was set up originally was he had to go around and find 4 guests every single time. Like, at least with my iteration, like, we had 3 regular panelists, so I had to go out and just find one person. So Around the Cage was happening. It would happen sparingly, and Davidson was having problems like just getting 4 different people to join the panel every week. He just got a little burnt out by it. It was like a year or so ago where Keith and Kyle called me while I was on Cape Cod, and we had a conversation about like, what if you hosted it? Like, what would you do different? I'm like, we changed the name. I'm like, we have 3 regular panelists. We'll bring on a special guest every week. And then like, we'll just do it. Like, we'll keep it organized. Like, we'll have fun with it. And then like, if we see things along the way as we start that need to change, we'll change it. So that's like where like the rebuttal rule came into play and all these different things. And I just, after probably like 7 or 8 shows, I'm like, we got something here. Cause like, I would see every media member come on, and they would realize by the time the first question was asked, this is different. Like, this isn't just like a media member hangout show. This is like, I gotta not only like know what I'm talking about, but I have to like do it better than these guys. Cause I'm not going to come on here, be a full-time media member and get beat by these guys. So it was amazing to kind of see some of the bigger names come on and just be like, oh shit, I got to like dig my feet in the sand and deliver, because I can't let these guys beat me. Which, and I thought, I honestly, up until the show happened last week, I still believe that Between the Links is the best panel MMA show in the sport right now. Like, it's just so good. It's just so good. And it's not because I feel like I'm a good, and I guess when we're talking about things you need to learn about yourself, I learned very quickly that I am a much better conductor than I am a passenger. Like, I am a much better driver of the train than I am like a passenger. Like, so I'm way better as the host of Between the Links than I would be as a panelist. That's just how I am. I knew my strengths. That's my strength. Let Keith and Craig and Davidson and the guests come in there. They show off their knowledge. That's their thing. I'm not there to show off mine. I'm there to just steer the train. And that's one thing I've learned with Loudmouth and with hosting Between the Links, and then trying to keep Keith Schilling in line. Whew, that's like the best job I've ever had him in the sport.
But could you have had a better send-off than the Larry David stuff? I feel like that really was like the perfect thing to, make it come together.
Oh God. You sit there and you hear something, and then Johnny Walker, Nikita Krylov ends, and you're like, this is going to be great. Like, Monday night is going to be great. And then you wake up Monday morning and the sun's shining, the birds are chirping, singing the most beautiful song ever. And then you start to think to yourself, like, what if he doesn't do it? Like, what if Davidson just backs out and like we never hear from him again? Like, because this is a big move. Like, this is a big move to have long flowing John Stamos hair and then shave it all like you're Larry David of all people. And man, when he came on our little StreamYard before, he had his hood on. We knew he had cut his hair. And none of us had seen it. Like when it was revealed to everybody, that's when we saw it for the first time too. But when he took that hood off, man, that's the greatest moment in MMA podcast history. I don't care what anybody says. There will never be a moment better than that one. Davidson Baker is the gold standard. That guy, kudos to him. I mean, luckily I'm bald, so I mean, there's not much you could do with my hair anyways, but man, oh man, that was amazing. I've watched that clip 1,000 times. 1,000 times. And it's better. It's just as funny on mute. I've listened to the podcast on Apple Podcasts. It's just as funny in audio form because I remember seeing it. It's so good. Like Davidson's the man. Davidson's the man. We had someone hit me up on Twitter and was like, Davidson, I needed this laugh. Thank you very much. And it's, I think The Sound of Violence is the name of this guy's podcast. And basically they just review MMA podcasts all over the place. And I was like, I sent him back. I said, if Davidson Baker does not get a year-end award, like it's a trap.
Right.
Like he should be that should be the audio. That should be the podcast clip of the year on every single outlet, regardless. Davidson Baker deserves that. Unreal. What a way to end it. I mean, it's my favorite show I've ever done.
For sure. The crazy thing is the fact that he did it, but he didn't half-ass it either. Like if you look at that scalp, it was shiny. There was nothing. I was like, wow, he did it, and he did it right too. Unbelievable.
I can't get that image out of my head. I can't.
No, and I love the way you did it too. Like you just see him with the hood. I was like, when's the reveal? Why don't you go ahead and take off that hood for us? I was like, oh man, it was everything about it was beautiful. But listen, I had a reliable source tell me that you got something cooking. I assume you can't tell us everything because you are cooking. But so is there a plan for that podcast to continue Between the Links without you? And I mean, what's sort of the plan going forward for that kind of podcast stuff?
I believe it will continue on. I will say it will not be called Between the Links. I don't know what it's going to be called. From what I understand, they are going to continue doing it. New host, new format. I think it's going to change in some ways. I'll let them reveal it. The other show I hosted, Off the Cuff, which is kind of similar, but it was just without the anger and the hostility. That I believe is going to stay on the network as well. That will also be renamed and have a little bit of a different feel to it than that. But the shout outs to Loudmouth guys. I mean, their whole network, there is just no one is producing the amount of content that those guys are. And just really talented people like Craig Allen's leaving the network too. He's the man. I think he's got a really bright future in the sport if he continues to travel this path. Keith's a grinder. John Franklin's very good. Davidson is obviously Davidson. Kyle does a great job. Obviously, Max Freeman's a very talented guy, and Marcel does great. Those breakdown shows are tremendous. There's just so much. And Fred Kirby, God, that guy is unbelievable too. There's just so many unique shows that they're doing. And I don't think anybody's putting out the amount of content and the amount of different programs that Loudmouth has been putting out over the years. And I think they'll be just fine. Like, I think, Keith said, you can't replace me, whatever. I think because of who they have there, I think they'll be able to carry on without a doubt. I'll be an afterthought in the next month. They'll be like, who's Mike Heck?
I remember talking to Craig, and he said that you guys had a guest on, and he was surprised by, I think it was like the level of anger or the fact that you guys were really, like you guys were going at each other. And he said it was to the point where he wasn't even sure if he would come back on or something just because, he was surprised by it. Did you find that a lot of guests were surprised by just like how much, I don't want to say animosity, but you guys went hard. I mean, it wasn't, nobody was pretending on there. People took that shit serious.
I'm not surprised by anything Keith does because I'm sure we're singling him out here. He's the one with the most animosity. But it was kind of cool to see Keith grow as well because first few episodes, Keith was just like, I'm just gonna kill all these people, even the guests. Like I don't care if I make the guests feel uncomfortable. Like I'm just gonna go after him. But then you say like the more the show evolved, he got better with that. Like he still was Keith, but he wasn't as aggressive as he was probably in the first 5 to 10 episodes. You know what I mean? So he's starting to understand the path that needs to be taken. He could still be himself. He just can, find a little bit of a middle ground. So I feel like things got a little better. There were episodes where things certainly got heated and was kind of uncomfortable from a viewer's perspective. But overall, it was just kind of just trying to keep all those guys in line is not an easy thing to do, especially when they're all yelling and screaming at each other. But we figured it out. We made it work.
All right. And as we wind down here, I have just one last question. It's going to sound a little bit job interviewy, but where do you see yourself in this industry in the next year, down the line?
It's a good question. I don't know. We'll see. Well, yeah, you're going to see soon. I'll tell you that, but probably where I'll end up. When the announcement comes, you'll know, and that's where I'll be in a year. Where that goes from after that, we'll see what happens, but we'll see. I'm just going to continue to do what I do. And one thing you need to know about me is when I dive into something, I get obsessed with it. I get very obsessed with it. And then once I figure it out, I get more obsessed with how to make it better. Like I had no radio experience, dove into that. I had no editing experience, dove into that. Like had no idea how to do video interviews, dove into that. Like that's just my personality. So I love the next challenge. I'm excited for the next challenge. And then I'll probably just expanding on that challenge in a year and 5 years, who knows? Wherever this crazy world takes us, as long as I'm happy and healthy and my wife's happy and my son's happy, that's really the most important thing to me. That's really it, man.
All right, there we go. I feel like you do have something big cooking. Like before you know it, we're gonna see like some kind of big announcement, something big. I'm excited for you for sure. Let's end it with this, man. Where can we find you on social media? If you want to plug your outlets, and then if you have any interviews or any kind of content we need to look out for in these next couple weeks.
Twitter handles right there at Mike Heck _JR. Instagram at Mike at mheck _JR. Did some interviews this week. Brandon Moreno, Gilbert Burns, Kama Worthy, Eric Anders, Kevin Holland. Anders and Holland both had their fights canceled. Both had very unique perspectives on their fights being canceled and what it means financially. It was funny because you hear Ashley Evans Smith on the A side. She felt like everyone should be compensated. Eric Anders is like, yeah, sure, I'd like to get paid, but I've been smart with my money, so it doesn't really affect me. And Kevin Holland was like, I spend my money like an idiot, but we're independent contractors, so I don't deserve to get paid. That's what we do. So it's very fascinating to hear their takes on that. So check that out, youtube.com/Mike Heck MMA. I will say the interviews that are up on the page right now, that is probably going to be the last of them. So at least for the next few days, I'll be hanging out with family after I wrap up with you, just hanging out with my kid, taking tomorrow, do the same, spend the weekend, and then hopefully there'll be an announcement on Monday for the next step.
All right, there we go. We look forward to it. Thank you guys for watching, and hopefully we'll see you again next week.